Okay, so welcome back. This is the second week of a three-part series, and today we're gonna recap things that we talked about, get a little bit more in depth, and then we're going to talk about doing some changing of our ecology inside of us if you choose to do so. We're going to talk about how you can control an overpopulation of a bacteria that's very common. It's called Candida. What Candida does is, as it becomes overpopulated, it takes care of its territory by producing this film that shields it from our immune system from attacking it, so that it can stay in populations, and then it interacts with the human body by attaching to some of its systems in its brain to affect the psychological feeling of the human host, so that when it's not being fed, we feed the bacteria or the yeast, so it produces a chemical that actually satisfies a demand in our brain that can cause anxiety if we don't get that relief. So that's Candida, and we're going to be talking about that. So just a little bit of background. I had an autoimmune disease some years ago, and it put me on a quest to understand more about how the human body works. It was parallel with when I was learning how to grow crops properly and how important the microbes and the fungi and proper balances in the soil are in order to get the proper nutrition. And the same thing is prevalent in the human body. It was interesting because I was listening to Deepak Chopra, and he was speaking with another spiritual leader, and they were talking about how this tiny bit of DNA, this COVID, this tiny bit of DNA can affect all of the DNA in the human body. He said, however, we need to look beyond the fact that this tiny bit of DNA can do that and realize that there are so many more millions of DNA that are present in all of the other microbes that we now need to be aware that are within us. These microbes are essential for our body, just like a tiny virus can affect this human body. All of those other ones can affect the human body, because that's where the whole system needs to have all of those microbes and all of that DNA working to make this human body in its best form. And that's what we're learning. In our gut, because of the bacteria that we have a pharmacological laboratory that can pretty much produce anything if we put the right photochemical or phytonutrients in from plants, and then we break them down with the proper bacteria. We produce all these chemicals. And that's what we're learning with the latest research. So looking back at our digestive system, we knew about the actual structure, but we didn't know what actually took place inside, or the depth of what takes place inside. And here what we have is, this is a chart which talks about the different numbers of the bacteria that are present in the different areas of the gut. And I put it in a simpler form. So in the stomach, there's very few microbes, because the stomach is a very acidic environment. So we only have between 1,000 and 10,000. Now there is a bacteria, or I believe it's a bacteria. It's called H. pylori, and H. pylori has been causing a lot of problems. People have an imbalance, and they try to control it. All of these, and H. pylori tend to be in the stomach. All of these imbalances, correcting them pharmacologically with antibiotics and trying to knock them off, sometimes we can do more harm than we can do good. What we're learning is that if we can promote good bacteria and start to promote good varieties to come into our body, the ones that are out of control tend to go back into control because they're kept into check. And that's what we're really learning. We want to see homeostasis in all the systems of the body. When we go from the stomach into the small intestine, there's many more microbes, anywhere between 100,000 to 100 million microbes. But then when we drop into the large intestine, this is really the area this is where all of the magic, our immune system, most of our nutrient flow, most of the neurochemicals for our body, they're all in the large intestine. And there can be between 10 billion and 10 trillion microbes in that large intestine. It's no taller than me, only 6 foot tall. The whole digestive system has a surface area of somewhere, the research is kind of spread out, but it's somewhere between 1 and 2 tennis courts in surface area that this whole digestive system has. And we're basically like a donut. You know, the hole in the center is our mouth to our butt, and it just has a silly straw in between going in all these different areas. And then we have bacteria that are actually not part of the human body, but they incorporate that whole tennis court area, and they are the most important defense system to the outside world, because we're so exposed with that surface area of 2 tennis courts to the outside world, food coming in, whether it be microbes or, you know, with COVID, they're finding that they're thinking a lot of it comes in through the gut barrier, as opposed to some of the other theories of just airborne. And these are the kinds of microbes that are prevalent, you know, everywhere on the planet, but especially in us. You know, we only have 22,000 genes, and we have between 2 and 4 million genes in the microbes on and in us. Look at how complex these guys are. Here's another chart, just looking at, you know, here's the DNA. There's DNA present. There's all of these systems, and this microbe, when it's born, or when it's you know, starts its life, it has a purpose, it has a function, and it's got DNA to tell it how, and it has enemies, and it has friends, and all of these things in its system. And all of this is going on inside of us, and it's only going on in small cycles. I mean, these things only live about 20 minutes in total cycle life. So in the course of one day, you have 72 lifetimes of these guys that are constantly changing within us. And it's all predicated upon what we're feeding them. These are some of the positive guys. Lactobacillus is what you find in yogurts, bifidobacteria, fermented foods. And S. boulardii is a great guy that we're going to talk about later, because that's the one that comes into the neighborhoods where Candida has started to occupy. And they're kind of like the strong guys in the neighborhood. And all of a sudden, they just kind of start hanging out and push the Candida out of the real estate. It starts to break down the biofilms, and it starts to clear up the area. And that's a way that you can get, you know, your balance back. These are all the foods that our microbes primarily like. These are called prebiotics. The human body cannot absorb any or very few of the nutrients that come from these plants. They are all going to get fermented by bacteria in your gut and broken down in a very profound way to be able to release all the nutrients that the human body needs for both physical as well as mental health. That's what we're now learning. Mental health is more tied to the microbes in our gut than we ever understood before. 90% of the serotonin, which is a feel-good hormone or a feel-good neurochemical in our body, 90% is produced by gut bacteria. And I'm a strong advocate that you can eat to be happy. If you have these microbes in high colony sizes and you're conscious of them, your awareness is there, you know, you don't take more than 2 or 3 days before you feed those colonies so you keep them in good shape, you're going to be producing tons of serotonin compared to somebody who doesn't have any fiber, isn't aware, isn't thinking about them. You know, to me, it's an analogy that if you got a cat or you have a dog, it's a responsibility. If you feed them, got to feed them the right food. The same thing with our microbes. If we have the same thought process for certain ones that are essential for our mental and physical health, you know, like beans, if you have beans in your diet, it has such a profound change that for the next 24 hours after that meeting, that meal, your body is going to act differently when it's presented with a certain circumstance. In other words, if you're presented with a food source, which is a high glycemic food source, which usually puts your body into a mode of, okay, produce insulin, store fat, we've got high sugar in here. Anytime that 24 hours after a bean meal, that is suppressed. And all of the sugar that would normally come in and cause an over-control condition is now met because of the chemicals that were produced by the bacteria that were fed by the beans. Within 24 hours of that happening, those chemicals are in the blood to curtail that. So people that have beans in their diet twice a week have a lower chance of diabetes. They have a better chance for weight loss. They also decrease the chance of colon cancer by, I think the numbers are somewhere around 30 to 50%. It's just really profound. Prebiotics versus probiotics. When you think of pre, think about before. These are the foods for the bacteria. When you think about probiotics, those are the live guys. Dark chocolate's in there. People say, well, dark chocolate? Well, dark chocolate is part of a fermentation process. They take the coffee bean and they ferment it down and it breaks down, and that's how it turns into that beautiful chocolate that's very healthy for us. Yogurts, kefirs, pickles, kimchi, all those types of foods. And these are the killers. Sugar, alcohol, smoking, lack of exercise. People say, how could lack of exercise? The human brain, the human body is so connected to the digestive system and the microbes that when you exercise, it's two-way communication. You're actually stimulating the bacteria in your colonies because they know what's happening in the physical body. It's a two-way street. And lack of exercise means you're not stimulating those colonies. You're not getting them active. The same thing with antibiotics. Antibiotics just go through the gut and they're indiscriminate. They will kill almost anything. Sugar, you'll get all kinds of out of control situations. Alcohol is basically a disinfectant. As a disinfectant, you know, it's meant to kill things. And inside of us, we really want to have this huge, diverse community, diversified, tons of different kinds of microbes, certain ones at certain times of the year, their favorite foods come in and they expand in colony sizes and then they contract. And then another time of the year, another food in our location is in high supply and those colonies get to expand and contract. And the body goes through these cycles and these microbes go through these cycles. And, you know, and that's the way things used to be. When now we have a worldwide food system, you know, we have plenty of everything all the time, but a lot of times we're just eating the same thing over and over again. And that's where we're getting the lack of diversification. Some of the experts I talk to say that you should see if you could try to eat, if it's possible, to eat 50 different vegetables and fruits in the course of a week. And that would be pretty tough to do for a lot of people because you really have to think about it. But that would give you the diversification to be able to have all of the little colonies fed, and everybody would be getting their different phytonutrients, and they'd be able to turn them all into the phytochemicals or the nutrichemicals that we need for our nutrition. And everything is set in place. The only thing is, if we're not feeding these guys, if we're not aware of them, if we're over sanitation, you know, it kills off, you know, different microbes. That same talk that I was hearing from Deepak Chopra, he was talking that the latest studies show that people that live in a city have 30% less diversification in their gut microbes than people that live out in the country, more in nature and more among our real environment. And that's really where it's at. I mean, when I'm learning about growing in the soil, if I look at some soil and I see that somebody's been farming commercially, what they're doing is they're circumventing what the microbes do. And instead, they're giving them NP and K, nitrogen, potash, and potassium. So this plant can grow tissue, it can do well, but when you take a look at the nutritional density of that plant, it's very low. What else you've done is you've eliminated the need for the microbes in the soil to be doing what they should be doing. And in some cases, if it's GMO, we're putting poison in the ground as well. In the human body, if we're not feeding the certain microbes, then they're starting to diminish in colony sizes till they become extinct. And exactly the same thing happens. You know, we're depending on other things, and we're depending on, instead of the human body healing itself, we're depending on outside pharmacological companies taking these chemicals that our body produces, and instead we're buying them through them to put into our body to try to bring our body in balance, but we're not getting to the cause. And here again on the bottom, organic food is really what the body knows to do with. When I talked about COVID and talking about the fact that this tiny bit of genetic material can alter this human body in such a profound way that you know, COVID is on everybody's mind. Well, what happens when we're bringing all this genetically modified DNA that our microbes know how to handle certain DNA, and all of a sudden the DNA has never been seen before? You know, we all have this inherent, like birds know how to migrate, you know, all of these things that are natural. The same thing with the microbes, they know how to break things down. What happens when the DNA is different? And what happens to the chemicals that are produced? You know, is it really worth it? Why did we get into GMO to begin with? We got into it because of big chemicals saying, you know, we can reduce the need to weed all of the agriculture. We could just spray everything with weed killer, and they claim that it would be just as nutritious and everything, but it's not true. The most nutritionally dense food on the planet is the food that is grown in the most biologically dense soil on the planet. And the two are correlated 100%. The same thing with human health. If we have the proper microbes and the proper balances and we're feeding them the proper foods, we have 100% of what the system can produce. As opposed to this stuff, we want diversification. This is a great film. I love watching this. This happens inside of us, and I try to make this happen whenever I can, because this is where health comes from, right at the source.
We know that many plant foods benefit our health. Scientists now believe one reason for this lies with the gut microbiome, the bacteria in your intestines. Your microbiome is nourished by meals like this, rich in one type of dietary fiber called resistant starch. Resistant starch can't be digested by your body, but instead becomes food for your gut bacteria. Most starch is easily digested. Starch is dissolved in the small intestine and then absorbed by your body, providing you with energy and nutrients. The remaining non-digestible portion is called resistant starch. The resistant starch continues its journey through your gut and arrives at the large intestine. We see that the resistant starch has become exposed to the healthy bacteria of the gut microbiome. This species of bacteria specialize in breaking down the resistant starch. This breakdown process provides the bacteria with the fuel they need to survive. As they use the starch for energy, they release small carbohydrate molecules. The neighboring bacteria feed on these carbohydrates. As the bacteria feed, they excrete even smaller molecules as waste. One of the final waste products is called butyrate, an energy source for your body. As the butyrate builds up, it is absorbed by the large intestine. The presence of butyrate encourages blood to flow into the vessels of the large intestine, keeping the tissue healthy. If your diet includes enough resistant starch, these cells will use butyrate as their main source of energy. Here, we can see the molecular surface of one of the intestinal cells. The surface is covered in special proteins that actively pump butyrate molecules into the cell. Once inside, they can be harvested for energy. In addition, butyrate has other benefits. Intestinal cells are sensitive to DNA damage caused by environmental factors. This cell's DNA has been damaged, resulting in a mutation. More damage could accumulate over time as the cell divides, which could lead to colorectal cancer. But a steady supply of butyrate allows the DNA damage to be more easily detected, and the cell can activate a suicide program in response. Because the damaged cell destroys itself, it can't progress to form a cancer. A starved microbiome is unable to protect you from cancer. By eating foods rich in resistant starch, you can nourish your microbiome and improve your health.
Okay, let me just get back to where we were here. So this is really important because this is where we're seeing so many of the problems in our society. And if you take a look at the left, this would be a gut that has got tons of butyrate that is just nourishing all of those cells, and everything is really healthy, especially on the bottom side where the blood area is and the red blood cells are, and you don't see any contamination in there. And on the right, that's where you're seeing all of this damage, and the damage is because we're not giving enough proper nutrition. The food source for those cells, the energy source for those cells is some other type of fuel source, less efficient. And as you could see here, it's causing all kinds of damage, and it's allowing a lot of bacteria to get very close to that blood barrier at the bottom here. And then this is where you start to get some of these issues, either contaminating the human body here, causing inflammation, or what else you end up having is this is your immune system. These guys, these dendritic cells are like, to me, they're one of nature's most amazing cells. And this is a primary frontline microbe or cell that is the beginning of your immune system. What this cell does on the bottom here, this is the blood side. These are your tight junctions, and this cell sticks its antenna up in between these tight junctions, and then it's trying to read what's going on up there. And how do they read that? They believe that they take a magnetic scan of the DNA of the molecule of the, whether it be a piece of food or whether it be another microbe or a virus, whatever it is, it's taking a DNA scan and it's able to come back down and then either produce a killer T cell, which will go after that exact DNA molecule for the rest of the human life. That's how we get immune. So in other words, when we go through chicken pox, and chicken pox came in and the dendritic cell found it, and the autoimmune system found out how to kill it by making a killer T cell, they're always on the lookout for that now because they know how to combat it. And there's always scouts out there looking, and they remember and they pass that information on. That's how intricate this system is. Think about the communication, how sophisticated it is. How can they possibly, it took us so many years to finally learn how to sequence DNA to figure out which bacterias and which fungi are different varieties. These guys do it in a more sophisticated way and then produce an immune system within our human body to protect us after they do it. That's pretty profound, if you ask me. And the only thing that we need to do in order to keep super healthy is to feed these cells exactly what they need. Butyrate is a superior food, a fuel source for this. So get butyrate in the system. Dysbiosis happens when you're feeding your good bacteria, as you're on the left, everything's in proper balance. All of a sudden, we're not feeding those guys, and everybody and their brother want to take up this beautiful, warm, cozy gut inside of you. And some of them might like things like burgers and fries and all the processed foods, you know, bagels and cheese and all of the things that these guys usually don't eat. All these guys will take care of, but these guys, in a lot of cases, are what we call parasitic. And the definition of a parasite is any inhabitant that gets something from the host without giving something back to the host equal to what it's taken away from the system. So in other words, when I got a bifido or I got a lactobacillus, when I'm feeding those guys, they're taking something out of the system, they're taking food from my system, but they're giving back to the system butyrate, serotonin, GABA, dopamine, neurochemicals, phytochemicals. When I go on the right side and I feed those fries with that soybean GMO oil or processed foods, whatever, I'm going to be feeding some of these other guys then aren't necessarily going to be giving anything back to the host. Matter of fact, in the case of Candida, what Candida does in order to survive is, like I said, it's going to produce a chemical. Doesn't make us high, but if we don't get that chemical every day, we start to get irritated, anxiety, chemical imbalance in the brain. You want to kick the cat, the car in front of you isn't going fast enough. You weren't going to get that bagel and you were starving for one. Those bacteria haven't been fed. You're feeling like you're going through a drug withdrawal, but you have no clue. And all of a sudden you pull into Tim Hortons, you get your bagel, you take a bite, the bacteria get fed, they release a chemical to your brain that reduces the anxiety and the tension, and you give a sigh of relief. And all of a sudden the car in front of you is going at the right speed and everything is okay. Because the mental condition of the human body has changed because we've just fed some bacteria that produce a neurochemical to change the actual perception of that human mind. Okay, let me just see where we are here. So again, just different stages as we go, and everybody is different, and we all change. You know, you can go in one direction and come back the other direction. And the beauty about this, the most fantastic thing about understanding your gut health is that you can turn it around so fast because your awareness has to be on the time frame that these microorganisms live. So if they're living for 20-minute lifetimes, it's not like having a garden outside that we only get one crop or two crops. You know, in the course of one day, we're getting 72 lifetimes. And if all of a sudden our mindness and awareness changes over a course of let's say a 30-day period, you can dramatically change the condition. I remember when I was teaching people about how to use garlic, and garlic is really profound because when you take a clove of garlic, there's a chemical and an enzyme and you smash them, mince it or slice it. You combine the two chemical and the enzyme. And in 10 minutes, there's a chemical called allicin. And allicin gets into our gut, into these dysbiosis microbiomes, and it creates an environment that kills them off, that hinders their growth. They don't like it. In some cases, it just knocks them dead. In other cases, they just don't want any part of it. And now they're trying to survive instead of multiply and procreate. And garlic will do that. And I recommend people doing it within a half hour rising and a half hour going to bed. Why those times? Because that's when your colonies are going to either expand or contract. When you're going to bed, they're going to contract because you're not going to give them any more food sources. So that's going to affect those guys. And then in the morning, as they're starting to grow, you're going to get them pissed off again because you're going to put some stuff in there that's going to hurt them. And I had some people that wanted to do it for 28 days. You know, you could do it for 3 days if you're sick. You could do it for 7 if you want to do a cleanse. Had a guy do it for 28 days. He said it was unbelievable because he said it changed the way that he was thinking. And it doesn't surprise me because our thoughts are connected to our microbes that are in our system producing the neurochemicals. Different diseases like celiac disease, again, damaged villi. All of these, again, if we had tons of butyrate coming in there, if we were nourishing these babies, you know, when we co-evolved with these microbes, it was estimated that we were eating somewhere between 50 and 100 grams of fiber a day. It'd be hard pressed to eat 40 or 50 grams of fiber a day if you were really looking at it. I look at it and, you know, if you switch from being just spaghetti to being chickpea pasta, you know, holy smokes, I picked up 15 grams of fiber in a lunch meal there. But you got to be aware and you got to think about it. And then by doing those little changes and increasing that fiber, you're going to make sure you're feeding these guys so you don't have an issue. And these issues are becoming more and more prevalent because of the way that we're dealing with things. Now, this is the process that I talked about that we're going to show you how to do. And this is the fruit that I used to produce a living environment for S. boulardii. And S. boulardii is a beautiful yeast that is like the strong man in the neighborhood if that and Candida are in the same neighborhood. So if all of a sudden you had a bunch of motorcycle gang guys that were starting to get into a town and everybody left the town and the whole town was filled with these motorcycle guys and that was the composition of the whole town, and all of a sudden, you know, some guys that were bigger and heavier started to move into the neighborhood, and they weren't violent or anything, but just their presence was intimidating enough that these guys said, you know, we don't want to hang out here anymore because it's just not nice, and they just kind of leave. Well, that's the kind of warfare that can happen in your gut if you pre-plan it and you understand what Candida likes to eat, what S. boulardii can do for you, and how to control the two and have Candida moved out of your neighborhood so it's in lesser volume and doesn't control you so much. So what I did was I got 4 pounds of fruit, all organic fruit. On the right side, these are some organic blueberries, some raspberries and strawberries that I grow. And then on the left is an organic pineapple, some mangoes, and some beautiful pears. And then what I did was I trimmed them all up, put them in I added 1 cup of water. I put it in a blender. I forgot to take a picture of that, but I put it all in the blender. And then I was left with this mixture, which looked just like a smoothie. That's how most people make their smoothies. And what I did was I put it on a low temperature and I simmered it for 20 minutes. And what you're doing there is you're sterilizing your fruit stock from any natural yeast or any natural bacteria that may have been present on that fruit during its lifetime. And by putting it in there for 20 minutes, not cooking it really at a high temperature, just a slight boil. Then this is Saccharomyces boulardii, S. boulardii we call them. And if anybody wants some of these capsules, I do have them in the store. And also what I've done is I made this huge bowl, as you'll see, of the concoction. And if some people want to come in and grab some of that and take some home in a container, you're welcome to that, because this makes an awful lot. And you can always add to it then down the road. So I took just 2 capsules. Yeah,
Excuse
question?
me, 1 second. Yep, one quick question. Someone asked if the garlic has to be raw.
Yeah, the garlic needs to be raw. So as long as you smash that garlic and you keep it under 110 degrees Fahrenheit, then allicin will be present, and allicin will have its antimicrobial. It's not really antimicrobial. I call it the enforcer. It's a microbial enforcer. It knows which bacteria to kill and which to allow to live. When you get an antibiotic from a doctor and he's giving you a strain, that's coming in and that is going to kill indiscriminately both good and bad bacteria and knock the populations down, and hopefully enough of the bad ones that they're down and they don't affect you anymore. But yes, under 110 degrees, and at 10 minutes is a time when you really smash that garlic. 10 minutes is when that allicin peaks, and then it's got a half-life of 3 hours. 3 hours later, it's only going to be half as strong. And if you heat it above 110 degrees, that kills that effect that garlic or allicin has on that microbiome. It still has tons of benefits. It's still food. It's a prebiotic, powerful food. Cooked, anyway, garlic is a wonderful prebiotic, food. But in order to get that one characteristic out of it, you have to make sure you don't get it above 110 degrees. And then what I did was I just sprinkled these right inside that concoction, and I stirred it in and then popped it in the oven that just has a light on, just like having dough rise. And then this is what it looked like just before the class, about 6 hours later. So you see it bubbling away there. And what that is now Aspergillosis, which is like a yeast, is starting to just go nuts on all of the sugars and everything that's in there. And I'm producing this huge, huge colony. So this is kind of what they do to make these when you go to a store and you buy the probiotic. Instead of taking the pill and just putting it in the gut and trying to have it find the food source, we're doing what you do when you buy a live probiotic like kimchi and sauerkraut. You bring the food source in with it being eaten at the same time by these microbes. So now what I'm going to do is for the next 2 days, I will stir this whenever I get a chance. It's got a beautiful smell like bread because it's in the yeast family. And then after a 2-day period, I'll take that and it'll stop bubbling because a little bit of alcohol will increase. The food source is gone. And then what I do is I put this into my diet over the next 2-week period, depending on how long you want to do it, as long or short as you feel comfortable doing it, and listen to your body. And what you will do is you will start to knock the candida out. And these are foods that you can eat when you are on a candida diet. So a lot of the foods like broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, onions, tomatoes. All right, so it's pretty extensive what you can eat. And if you Google this, I mean, that's all you need to do is Google candida diet or candida foods to eat, not to eat. And these are the ones that they want you to stay away from. And it makes sense. The candida diet strictly prohibits the use of sugar, gluten, and alcohol, dairy products, and high quantities of lactose. So primarily they want you to stay away from gluten, sugar, alcohol, and the other one would be any kind of dairy products. And when you start to stay away from these foods and you're eating the other foods, what you're doing is you're not feeding candida and you're making its life real tough, because Aspergillosis is going to be competing for the food source, and they're bigger, they're stronger, they're not violent. But the other guys are going to move on because they're finding they're getting kicked out of their neighborhoods. And that's how we can reconstruct the gut.
Tom,
Yeah.
someone asked, what temperature do you set the oven to?
Just having the light on in the oven is all you need. The light bulb. Because the light bulbs usually in an oven are still incandescent bulbs, and if they're not, they still tend to just produce enough heat. It's the same temperature if you think our gut, no higher than 90-some degrees, 98 degrees, and anywhere in between there. Mine has been fermenting. It's probably in the upper 70s, lower 80s. Okay.
And one more question. When do you refrigerate it?
After about a 2-day period, that's when I start refrigerating it. And you can tell
Okay.
because it stops bubbling at that time.
And is it refrigerated over the 2 weeks, or
Yeah,
do you
then I
leave it at
just
room
keep it in the
temp?
fridge. And this book that I talk about, which is called Grow a New Body. I don't know, is that backwards for everybody in there when they
No,
read it? It is
no,
when I
looks
look at
good.
it, it's
Okay.
backwards like a mirror. But it's called Grow a New Body. And this guy is amazing because, you know, he talks about how to unlock a lot. He's a shaman. He talks about a lot of the different ways that we can look at food. And what he recommends you do is that when you're going to make rice, like brown rice, tomorrow, you take your brown rice today and you add some water and you add some S-Boulardii. So S-Boulardii could start doing work for you before you ever bring it into your body, and it'll start to break down a lot of the rice so that you'll get more nutrition out of it. So he talks about different ways you can incorporate that into your diet. But just getting a couple tablespoons in before you're eating a meal and then having your meal come in and bring S-Boulardii into your body will start to slowly work at that candida. And the way that you could know if you're having a candida, if you're a woman, you tend to have a lot of female issues that tend to be more prevalent to show that overpopulation. If you look at the diets of things, this is a great site I brought up. It's called a Candida diet: foods to eat, foods not to eat. So here they break it down. These are all the foods to eat. And it just lists everything there.
So
And you
while we're
just try to
looking at
stay, and then you try to stay away from the ones that they tell you not to, but this is a great source. Again, just on the internet, just looking for Candida, foods to eat, foods not to eat, because the internet is such a great source. And I always tend to feel that, when you start to search on the internet, you're putting your energy out and you're trying to get something that's going to relate to you. And, you'll find articles that'll just be clear as heck that you'll be able to read and say, yeah, now I got it. These are the things I can eat. These are the things I should stay away from. But yeah, and after doing this for like a week or two, what you find is that your taste buds will change, or your desires for food will actually change. And the reason for that is that the bacteria that are going to be wanting to be fed are going to be different than the bacteria that were in the populations before. We're now starting to understand that our cravings for food are predicated upon the calls from the bacteria that reside within us, producing neurological chemicals that react with the brain and produce the signals that get us to get our different ideas of what we want to eat. And people that eat a lot of a certain thing continue to eat a lot of a certain thing because they got colonies that are used to being fed. And when you change, it's very difficult. But after you change for a period of time, all of a sudden, what you used to eat on a regular basis would feel strange as heck to eat, because you don't have the same microbes calling for the food, and you also don't have the same microbes to break it down the way it used to. But it's extremely connected. There's a lot of emotional connection as well. When you think about it, these microbes are being fed, and you're also sharing emotions with other people. So you tend to remember all of the emotions that were taking place at that time. And a lot of them, the memories will be there, but the microbes with the chemicals won't be the same. It's really, this world is a lot simpler than we think, but it's more complex from the point of view that we have to understand that we have this huge responsibility to understand what the digestive system is really made up about. And if we're mindful of that, now we can be in charge of those colonies as opposed to just haphazard. And we only look at it when we got an issue. Or, you know, when there's a problem, we go to the doctor and we say, hey, something's going on. Mental issues right now. The population, over 50% of our population is stressed out. It doesn't surprise me when you look at the diets and you look at the amount of fiber that if people were eating this fiber, the butyrate fuel source would just be fueling the system. The serotonin, the GABA, the dopamine would just be flooding the system. And, you know, people would say, you know, yeah, there's a lot going on, but, you know, how is everything really today? It's really okay. But our mind doesn't want to think that because we want to try to figure out what's going to happen next. And it's not healthy. But that's because of chemical imbalance, mental imbalance. We want to know it all.
We have a couple more questions, Tom.
Sure.
So the first one is, would you eat this on an empty stomach? And if so, how much? And would you eat it before each meal or just before dinner?
So what I try to do with the Espelardi is I have it, first of all, I try to restrict, and everybody is different, but the latest science shows that we shouldn't be eating from the time we wake up to the time we go to bed. We should try to at least have 3 to 4 hours after our last meal before we go to bed. And if we can, we should limit that period to about 8 hours of food intake. If we're doing that during that short period of time, then the first food intake, I would want to get some Espelardi in there with whatever food I'm taking in. I would also do it with the second time, but I would start out slow. I would start out the first day and I would maybe only do it with one meal to adjust my body a little bit, to get everything adjusted. And then the next meal, you know, next day do maybe 2 meals, just slowly introduce it to the body. Remember, we want to go slow and easy because it's going to have profound changes, but we don't want to just, you know, more is not better. You know, creating a war inside of us is not what we want to do. We want to gently go in a direction. If we look at it that, like a garden, if we're trying to change a garden, it's going to take time. We just want to go, we want to put the fundamental seeds in there, and then we want to watch it and we want to nurture it and we want to see how we're feeling. But yeah, I would do it. I would start out, you know, nice and easy with your body, maybe a teaspoon before the first meal, see how your body feels with it. You know, go up to a teaspoon twice a day. You know, third day, maybe go to a tablespoon once or twice. See how you're doing. You know, your body will tell you if all of a sudden you're feeling very irritable or something isn't just right with your body. It's because maybe Candida is getting attacked and you have a bigger colony size. Remember, all of us, every participant, every person on the planet has different proportions of all of these different colonies inside of us, in all different combinations and all different, and it's always changing. My microbiome last week is different than it is today, and it was different yesterday. There were a couple of guys that were so crazy. They did it for a whole year. Every single day they did a fecal sample and recorded all of the different microbiome changes over every single day. And it was really profound because one of them got salmonella poisoning during that. And oh my God, what a change it had in the environment. And it was really, I could relate to it because that's how I had my autoimmune start, with a salmonella poisoning. And, you know, it was like reading about what's happening inside of you. And that put me on a quest to try to get huge diversification back. So like when I went to Costa Rica and we were on a tour, and the tour guide said that termites actually have 2,000 different varieties of bacteria that are very healthy for the human body. And he was eating a couple raw termites, live termites. He says, you want some? And sure enough, I did it because that's what I've been taught to do. And it's very healthy for you to do those kinds of things, if you have a belief system that likes that.
Okay, another question is, do you do this only if you notice that you have a Candida problem, or would it be helpful in any case?
So what I don't believe that I have a Candida problem, but I like to introduce these bacteria. Here's the nice part about Espelardi, is that Espelardi is not a bacteria or a yeast that is going to be a huge dominant resident in your colonies going forward. When it comes in, it has that process of kind of cleansing the neighborhoods, and then it hangs out for a couple week period as you stop putting the source in. Within a couple of weeks, it's gone out the system, and then re-inhabiting with more of the good bacteria like the kimchis and the sauerkrauts and the prebiotics, so that you're re-inhabiting those real estate sections that have been cleaned out because Aspergillosis is leaving. That's really the strategy and the thought process for that. Okay, so and you could tell also if you look at the list of foods to avoid if you're trying to get rid of Candida, and if you look at that list and you see that you eat quite a few of those on a regular basis, and that's the thing, on a regular basis. You know, at one time in my life, I had alcohol every single day. I had a beer. That meant that I was dramatically altering that environment as opposed to the person that had a beer every 3 days. So you have to look at the frequency and what you're doing inside that environment. I haven't had a beer for 20 years, so I'm lucky. I know that alcohol is not compromising my microbiome. Other people may still have that issue to deal with and need to figure out where the balance is going to come from. But all these things are factors.
So if you don't think you have a Candida problem and you're just doing it because you know that your body needs it, but how long would you do this? I guess if you did know you had a problem, how long would you do this? Or if you didn't have a problem, would you just do it once a month to sort of some sort of cleanse or something? And people are just asking how long they would do this.
Right. So there's so if people feel that they fit that mold of somebody who feels that they're addicted to sweets and they're very compelled to do it, that's when you need to do extremely strict, and you need to do it for a period of time of 2 weeks, even 3 weeks, because the longer you do it, the more you're going to be knocking those colonies back into size. If you don't see an issue, if you say, okay, I do eat bagels, 3 or 4 times a week, and I do have breads, and I do a lot of these things that are the favorite foods of Candida, then maybe what I only want to do is I want to do it for maybe 3 to 4 days or 5 days to see how my body feels doing that, and see if I'm starting to change some of the cravings. Try to get in touch with where, and I like to keep a journal when I'm doing things like this, because you're going to be changing some of the things that can affect your mood. If you do have a Candida problem and you're not feeding it and you're bringing Aspergillosis, you might be feeling some tension. You might be feeling some anxiety. You want to document that so you could start to see and you could be aware. And then the next day you might see it's different. But again, it's hard to say exactly how long, depending on where you feel your body is at, where you can kind of assess what your pattern is. There was a time in my life that I had coffee on a bagel on a regular basis, and maybe a pastry, whatever. If I had that, then I would start to say, hey, I probably want to do a lot more of this for maybe a 2-week period, and if I'm going to do it, there's nothing wrong with trying to get some good books to try to get some more insight as to what they're feeling about, how long you should do it, or how you can even incorporate it into some rice dishes. Because another thing with Aspergillosis, you could take Aspergillosis, and when you're soaking rice to cook the next day, he recommends you can put Aspergillosis in there to break the rice down so that it becomes more nutritious for you. And even if you don't have a problem with Candida, you can do that to make your food more digestible and more nutritious for the human body. The thing that intrigued me was that digestion is one of the most energy intensive processes that the human body does. And if I could possibly get some of that to take place outside the body, which is what a living probiotic is, and bring it into the body, wow, I'm able to not require as much energy for my body to assimilate those nutrients, because I've taken some of the energy needed and outsourced it to these microbes outside my body and then brought them in. Kind of makes sense where, these, especially when you think about the fiber breakdown, having all these colonies work in unison one after another and the symphony going on. When you eventually get the body running on a very good, efficient basis where, you know, the food's coming in, it's eliminating, and the system is running really well, and the transfer through the gut wall is getting tons of butyrate. I mean, you eat beans and all of a sudden you've got energy for 5-6 hours because you have everything set up to be able to handle it. When you first start out, you might eat beans and you might not feel like you got energy out of them because you didn't have all those guys working yet. But you got to condition and get the whole system set up. And then when you got the whole system set up with these colonies ready to go and you pop a good source in, boom, you got all the energy you need off, you know, these high fibers foods. And it's a superior energy to any of the other foods you could have. Chris?
Okay, yeah, we do have one more question.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, so someone noticed that once they ate a lot of kimchi, about half a cup, and their stomach got really bloated. So was that because of candida?
No, probably what it was is that eating a half a cup of kimchi to start out is rough on a system. That's like what I'm saying with an Espellardi. If I were to take a half a cup of Espellardi the first day and drink it down, it could create some pretty big warfare because it's a huge amount of that colony size being put into action all at once. In the case of a kimchi, what I always try to have people do is to start out and use it as a relish and put a small amount in there. And then the next day, maybe add a little bit more, but do it on a very small basis to start to introduce it in the body. Because if we bring too much of a colony in there, yeah, bloated is one of them. Gas, to me, you know, I have a saying, if you're not farting, you're not fermenting, okay? And you want to be fermenting. And, you know, gas can be uncomfortable if you're not used to fermenting and your fermenter isn't optimized, because everything doesn't necessarily flow the way it is. You know, the gas has to escape. If the system isn't real clean, the gas can't escape because there's other food in the chamber further down. That can cause bloating because it can't work its way down. So again, when the system becomes more efficient, those problems go away. And the best thing to think about it is that when you're making these changes in the digestive system, you're talking about colonies that are going to grow and multiply. So a little bit will become a lot. So remember, just do things slowly. You know, after I've been doing this for a while, you know, like I made a big pot of greens and beans today. So, you know, I had some earlier and then I had some a little bit later. And then tomorrow, you know, I'll have greens and beans, you know, twice again for that day. And, you know, because I'm going through a good dose of getting these bacteria going and having them run and feeding them good and, you know, getting my body a good jolt of powerful energy.
Okay, so we have another question. Is taking Espellardi capsules less effective than cultivating a mixture?
I think it's more effective simply because anytime that you can bring the food source in with the bacteria being fed at the time, your chances of transplant and relocation are much higher. Because otherwise you've got a capsule going in there that has to dissolve, break the Espellardi out. The Espellardi has to find food, attach to the food, maybe compete for that food, and then grow on that food if it made it through the acid wash through the stomach well enough. So my personal logic is that I'd prefer to take something live. That's why, you know, I found kimchi to be just amazing for my body, but I had to work it up. And I got to the point where I could eat, you know, a cup or 2 cups of kimchi a day, no problem. And I was craving it for a period, but I was also cleansing a lot of bacteria that were my old feedstock regime. And I was replacing it with a whole new concept of how I wanted my garden to look like inside. That's what I call it. It's, you know, to me, it's a garden. And it's more like a garden than it is anything else, because it has the same fungi, same bacteria that I have out in the field, you know, some of the same transfers that take place, all that stuff. Matter of fact, you can buy probiotics called SBO, soil-borne organisms. They take the bacteria out of the soil, they put them in they procreate them and multiply them in the laboratory, put them, freeze dry them, put them in capsules, and you're buying soil-borne organisms to put back into your human body to get your health back to where it should be.
And was last week's lecture recorded? And if so, will it be posted on the YouTube channel?
Last week I forgot to press the record button. I realized that afterwards. So today we did a summary of what last week's was in a little bit condensed version. And this one is definitely recorded, so it'll be up there. And then we'll have one more class next week. We'll be talking a little bit more about some of the latest research. We'll be talking about anybody's experience using S. boulardii during the week here at the store. If anybody wants to come in and either get capsules, or if they would like to have some of my S. boulardii that's already working away, you're welcome to come in with a container and we'll share some with you. I absolutely think it's an amazing ability to share microbes with other people on the planet, because I think it's something that it's sharing DNA that's going to live inside of you. I think it's pretty profound. Okay, are we all set on questions? We're just about 8 o'clock here, a little bit after, and I don't like to run too late.
Yep, you're good. Peter just said thanks. It was a good show.
Awesome. Yeah.
And you've got other people saying the same. So thank you very much, Tom. This was very helpful.
Okay. And I'm here to help. So if anybody has a private message, call the office here, whatever you need. It's just a pleasure to share some of this knowledge with you. There's an old saying, a teacher always needs to teach what he needs to learn the most. And whenever I'm teaching, I tend to learn stuff along with everybody. It's an amazing process. And what I'm learning about microbes is that it's just profound what they have, the amount of DNA inside of us that we can tap in and make this journey of life so much easier and healthier. It's pretty neat. So thanks for being part of the journey, and have a great night. And we'll see you next week.